My son thought I was asleep. At 3:08 a.m., a faint metallic scrape jolted me awake, a sound too rhythmic to be an animal, too cautious to be the wind. I pushed aside the curtain of my bedroom window and peered into the yard. Under the thin wash of moonlight, behind the crooked pine tree that had stood there long before we bought the property, I saw him. Evan. My only child, my living reminder of a wife who'd been gone just over 2 years. He was digging in the cold earth with a desperation I had never seen in him. Not when he lost his first game in Little League, not the night he broke his wrist, not even at his mother's funeral. His shadow jerked and flinched as he worked the shovel into the ground, breath rising in frantic clouds. Sweat clung to his neck despite the chill. Every few seconds he froze, scanning the yard as if he expected something, or someone, to leap from the shadows. He didn't look up at the window. He didn't know I was watching. And I didn't call out, didn't flip on a light, didn't step outside and ask why my 30-year-old son was burying something at an hour when only trespassers and ghosts were awake. I just watched. The digging lasted nearly 20 minutes. Then, Evan went to his truck, reached inside the back seat and pulled out a long rectangular case, dark gray, heavy-looking with reinforced corners like something used to store tools or firearms. He lowered it gently into the hole, hesitated only once, then began covering it with dirt, patting down the soil with the flat of the shovel. He didn't look back. He didn't pray. He didn't even breathe for a stretch of seconds as he stood there staring at the ground he'd just sealed. And when he finally drove away, gravel popping under his tires, I kept staring at the disturbed patch of earth, feeling the cold settle into my bones. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But a familiar ache bloomed where grief had lived too long. Because something about the way he buried that case, fast, furtive, final, told me the boy I'd raised was tangled in something far darker than a simple mistake. And in that moment, a sharp, dreadful clarity hit me. I finally understood exactly what I was dealing with. But to see how we reached to this moment, how a son who once begged to help me build birdhouses on weekends came to bury secrets before dawn, we have to go back. Back to when things still looked normal. Back to when my company, Ironwood Building Co., was thriving. Before everything began to splinter.
6 months before that night, if you'd asked me about Evan, I would have said he was the future of Ironwood Building Co., the one person I trusted to inherit everything I'd clawed my way into building. I'd started the business in 1991 with a borrowed generator, 4 rusted ladders, and a pickup that stalled more than it ran. 3 decades later, we were the biggest contracting outfit in the entire Red Valley region, handling everything from municipal renovations to multi-million-dollar commercial builds. Evan grew up on job sites, stacking scrap wood into castles, learning the difference between drywall screws and deck screws before he could read. He'd been my right hand since he was 16. Clients adored him. My crew respected him. Hell, half the town assumed he'd already taken over. But sometime last winter, something in him shifted. It began so subtly, I blamed myself for noticing. A missed Tuesday planning session, a late arrival to a client call, a murmur of private phone conversations he'd silenced the moment I walked into the office. Nothing dramatic, just off. Then came the questions. Not the normal ones, like how to schedule subcontractors or manage overtime hours. No, Evan wanted to know about profit margins on specific builds, long-term supplier contracts, storage lease agreements, all the back-end numbers he'd never cared about before. He claimed he wanted to understand the business holistically, but the way he kept pushing for documents he didn't need, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Still, I didn't say anything. Not yet. The first real warning came in March when Mrs. Langford called me from her lakeside property. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice tight with confusion, "why is another contracting firm asking detailed questions about my cabin expansion? I thought Ironwood had exclusive rights. Another firm? I asked her which one. Granite Ridge Development. The owner sounded very informed. Too informed. That one call could have been a mistake, a coincidence. But 2 weeks later, the manager of the Evergreen Mall reached out with the same complaint. Then the city liaison for the drainage reconstruction project. 3 separate clients, 3 separate projects, one competitor requesting confidential details they shouldn't have known. Someone was feeding them information, and only a few people had access to our internal data. Evan was one of them. I didn't confront him then either. Instead, I did what 30 years in construction had trained me to do. Slow down, look closer, trace the cracks back to the point where the structure first began to weaken. I started paying attention. Real attention. The spotless desk that used to hold sketches and coffee rings was now sanitized to emptiness. His laptop, which he'd once left open for anyone to reference, was suddenly locked every time he stepped away. He shielded his phone like it held state secrets. He flinched when I mentioned audits. He avoided eye contact when discussing budgets. My son wasn't just hiding something, he was protecting it.
I didn't plan the test. It came out naturally. One of those offhand remarks that carries more weight than you intend. It was late March, a Thursday. The kind of spring morning where the frost melts before the sun fully rises and the smell of wet cedar hangs in the air. Evan sat across from me at our usual diner booth, stirring his coffee the way he always did when he wanted to look relaxed, but wasn't. I watched the spoon clink against the ceramic, each tap a tiny tremor of nerves he didn't think I noticed. "I forgot to tell you," I said casually, sliding him a folder I didn't actually need him to see. "The Ridgeview Estates project got final approval yesterday. Biggest contract of the year, $1.4 million. We start next month." For a split second, barely the length of a breath, Evan froze. His spoon stopped mid-stir. His eyes flicked up, not to me, but past me, as if he were calculating something, filing away numbers for a conversation waiting on the other end of a different phone. Then, just as quickly, he recovered. "That's great," he said, smiling too fast. "I'll handle all client communications as usual." But the smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did anymore. He finished his coffee in 3 quick gulps and left earlier than usual. I watched him through the diner window as he stepped outside, phone already against his ear before the door even closed behind him. That was the moment the truth shifted from fear to certainty. I drove to the office with a tightness in my chest that only deepened when I saw Tom, my foreman, leaning against the workshop door. Tom had been with me 15 years. Loyal, steady, the kind of man who wouldn't misplace a bolt, let alone a secret. "Tom, can I ask you something? And I need you to be straight with me." His brows pinched. "Of course. Have you noticed anything off about Evan?" He exhaled slowly, eyes drifting toward the main office. "What kind of off?" I don't know. Different." Tom hesitated long enough to make my stomach drop. "Well, he's been requesting a lot of documents lately. Stuff he's never cared about before. Job cost breakdowns, vendor contracts, bid strategies, shipping agreements. He said he needed them for streamlining operations." My pulse thudded in my ears. "And you gave them to him?" "Jake, he's your son. I figured you told him to ask." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because that was the moment something inside me quietly cracked. Not loud, not explosive, but enough for me to feel the shift. My son was building something behind my back, and Tom had unknowingly given him the tools. That night, I sat in my kitchen in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of settling floorboards.
staring at a family portrait from a decade ago. Evan was smiling in that picture, really smiling. I tried to remember the last time I'd seen that version of him. I couldn't.
A week later, on a quiet Sunday evening, the house felt too still. Evan had stopped dropping by unannounced months ago, but he texted earlier asking if he could swing through to grab something from the basement. No explanation, no details, just that. He arrived around 7:40 p.m., offering me a quick, distracted, "Hey, Dad," before heading straight downstairs. No small talk, no eye contact, no hint of what he was looking for. I stayed in the living room, pretending to read the paper, but the silence beneath my feet set my teeth on edge. Evan never moved quietly. Every step he took on those old wooden stairs had always carried weight, presence. Tonight, his footsteps were controlled, deliberate, as if he didn't want anyone knowing exactly where he was. A few minutes passed. Then I heard it. A voice. His voice. Low. Urgent. And another voice. Faint but unmistakably present. A man. I couldn't make out the words at first, just tones, sharp and quick, like an argument forced into whispers. I folded the newspaper slowly and leaned back, pretending to adjust my seat while letting my head angle just right. The heating vents in the living room carried sound from the basement with surprising clarity, if you knew how to listen. And I listened. Evan's voice. Tense and strained. "No, I haven't told him yet. I said I'd handle it on my terms." A pause. A murmur from the other voice, too muffled to decipher. Evan again, sharper this time. "Because he's not stupid. If I push too fast, he'll know. I need the rest of the contracts first."
Another pause, a hissed response I couldn't make out. Evan's frustration cracked through. "I said I'd get them. The lease agreements, the supplier lists, everything. But you need to chill. I can't just walk out with 30 years of paperwork without him noticing." I felt something cold coil in my stomach. Another exchange below, too faint to separate into words, but tense enough to feel. Then Evan, "We talked about this. Once it's all in place, we move, not before. I'm not risking him catching on." Not risking him catching on. He meant me. My pulse hammered. I gripped the arm of my chair so hard my knuckles whitened. A long silence followed, broken only by the creak of the basement floor as Evan paced. Then his voice softened, almost resigned. "Look, I'm doing this for both of us. But if it comes down to it, I'll handle him. Just stick to the plan." Handle me. Not deal with me, not talk to me, handle me. It was a word used for obstacles, for problems, for things standing in the way. The conversation ended with the scrape of something heavy, maybe a drawer, maybe the old metal storage cabinet, followed by soft footsteps climbing the stairs. I barely had time to sit upright before Evan stepped back into the living room. His expression was calm, too calm. A mask perfectly fitted. "Found what I needed," he said, lifting a small plastic bin I knew damn well hadn't been down there 2 hours ago. "Didn't mean to intrude." I nodded and forced a smile I didn't feel. "No trouble, son." He walked to the door. Stopped. "Everything good?" he asked without looking back. "Of course," I said. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. I waited 30 seconds, counted each one like a slow-ticking fuse, then went down into the basement myself. Whatever he'd been handling, whatever he'd been discussing, he hadn't left a trace. But I heard enough. 3 days passed with an unnatural sort of quiet, like the house, the office, and even the town itself were all holding their breath, waiting for the next crack to appear. It came on a Wednesday. I got to the office earlier than usual, unlocking the front door while the sky was still gray with dawn. The building smelled like sawdust and cold metal, a familiar comfort, but the moment I stepped inside my office, something felt wrong. Subtle, but wrong. My desk was exactly as I'd left it. Papers undisturbed, laptop closed, pens neatly lined in their tray. Nothing out of place. Except for one thing. The filing cabinet in the corner, old, dented, easily overlooked, was pulled out by a fraction of an inch. Barely noticeable, unless you'd been opening and closing it for decades. I walked toward it slowly, my pulse steady but heavy, like it was preparing itself for something my brain hadn't yet accepted. I ran a finger along the cabinet's edge. Cold steel, dust, and a faint smear on the lower drawer where a hand had recently brushed it. I pulled the drawer open. Everything looked normal. Invoices, ledger sheets from the early 2000s, vendor agreements, contracts that hadn't been touched in years. But the normality felt staged, like someone had spent time making sure it appeared untouched. Someone inexperienced in hiding their tracks. Because at the bottom of the drawer, beneath the stack of outdated agreements, one sheet of paper didn't belong. White, crisp, too new. I lifted it out. A printed spreadsheet of Ironwood's active vendor accounts. Every supplier we use for concrete, steel, lumber, electrical, plumbing, drywall, you name it. Not publicly available information. Not something that should ever be in this drawer. And at the bottom of the page, a handwritten note. Not mine. Not Tom's. Evan's handwriting. Sharp slants, rushed lettering, ink pressed too hard into the page. Confirm which suppliers will switch. Follow up with M by Friday. Keep copies separate. Separate from what? From me? From the rest of the company? From anything traceable? My throat tightened. I stared at the note until the ink seemed to blur, until my mind finally processed two details that chilled me more than the words themselves. This note wasn't meant to be left behind. Evan had misfiled it. Maybe he'd been rushed, maybe startled, maybe sloppy. The M he referenced, that wasn't a supplier. That was whoever he'd been whispering to in my basement. Someone he trusted enough to conspire with. Someone who wanted my company's infrastructure. Every contract, every relationship, every foundation stone I'd set before Evan was old enough to tie his own boots. I folded the paper and slid it into my jacket pocket, taking care not to alter a single thing in that drawer. He needed to believe I hadn't noticed. He needed to feel safe. Because now, I wasn't just a suspicious father. I was a man preparing to uncover the full blueprint of a betrayal being built piece by careful piece. I stood, letting the office settle around me. The creaks in the rafters, the distant hum of a delivery truck, the quiet scrape of wind against the glass. And under it all, a dark certainty began to take shape. Evan wasn't planning to leave Ironwood. He was planning to take it. All of it.
The following week crawled by with the heady, electric tension of a storm gathering behind the mountains, silent, invisible, but waiting for its moment to break. It broke on a Monday. I had just finished a site walkthrough at the Ridgeview Estates build, trying to act natural while my mind chewed itself raw with possibilities. Evan's note, his whispered conversation, the buried case in my backyard I wouldn't discover until months later. Tom was waiting for me near the tool trailer, arms crossed, jaw tight. He wasn't a man who worried easily. He'd once worked through a dislocated shoulder without complaint. But today, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Jake," he said quietly, "you got a minute?" "Of course." My stomach tightened.
He gestured toward the back of the lot, away from the crew. His boots crunched on gravel, steps heavy with something he didn't want to say. When we reached the far edge of the site, nothing around us but unsettled dirt and the skeleton framing of what would eventually be a cul-de-sac, he stopped. "I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof." Proof. The word lingered, sharp and sour. I didn't speak. I let him gather the courage he clearly needed. "It's Evan," he said finally. "He's been reaching out to some of the suppliers behind your back." I kept my face still. "Suppliers?" Tom nodded. Cedar Ridge Lumber, Calmuth Steel, Ridgeway Concrete, a few others, asking about what terms they'd be willing to offer if Ironwood suddenly wasn't part of the arrangement. I felt the air in my lungs turn dense. What did they tell him? "That depends." Tom scratched the back of his neck. "Some said they weren't comfortable talking without you present. Others said they offered him incentives." He swallowed. "Big incentives." A flicker of heat twisted in my chest. Anger, betrayal, something darker I didn't want to name. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked quietly. Tom hesitated. And then, slowly, he pulled something from the pocket of his flannel jacket. A phone. Not his. A cheap prepaid model, the kind people buy when they don't want their calls traced. He placed it in my hand. "This was left on the front seat of my truck this morning. I don't know who put it there, but it was on and a message was pulled up. I didn't touch anything. I thought you should see it first." I looked at the screen. One text message. Unread. No contact name, just a number. The message read, "He's asking questions. Deal with him before Friday." My heart stopped. "Tom," I said slowly, "this wasn't meant for you." "I know." His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "Whoever sent it, they think the phone belongs to Evan." Silence pressed in around us, thick enough to choke. The crew continued the working a few hundred feet away, laughing, hammering, oblivious. But here, in the shadow of a half-built home, the truth settled between us like a weight I could barely lift. Someone in Evan's circle believed Tom was a threat. Someone wanted him removed. Before Friday. I opened my mouth to speak, but didn't get a chance. Because that evening, just after sunset, Tom's truck went off the road on his drive home. The police ruled it an accident. Wet pavement, sharp turn, loss of control. But I knew better. The timing was too precise. The message on the phone too clear. And when I arrived at the crash site, looking down at the twisted metal of the truck, the skid marks that didn't match the weather conditions, and the absence of any sign that Tom had even hit his brakes, I understood exactly what had happened, and exactly how far my son, or the man he worked with, was willing to go.
The morning after Tom's crash, the town felt wrong. People still went about their routines, warm coffee, idle talk, trucks rumbling down Main Street, but underneath it pulsed a quiet dread, like everyone sensed a predator moving through the woods but couldn't see it yet. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stared at the prepaid phone until sunrise, replaying every detail of the message. Deal with him before Friday. Tom hadn't made it to Friday. Someone had moved fast. Someone who didn't hesitate. Someone who didn't fear consequences. If Evan wasn't the one who sent that message, then the person he was partnered with, the man from my basement, was far more dangerous than I'd allowed myself to consider. By mid-morning, I knew where I needed to go. Granite Ridge Development, the competitor that had suddenly gained interest in my clients, my projects, my suppliers, the company that had climbed from a minor regional builder to Ironwood's shadow almost overnight, and the company run by Marcus Vale. I drove across town, each mile compressing the air tighter in my lungs.
Marcus's office sat in a renovated warehouse overlooking the river. Sleek steel, tinted windows, a far cry from the humble trailer he'd used just 3 years earlier. I stepped inside. The receptionist barely glanced up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but Marcus will want to see me." She opened her mouth to argue, but a low voice echoed from the hallway. "Jake Hale." Marcus walked out with that same smooth confidence he'd always carried. Tall, dark hair slicked back, suit pressed sharp enough to draw blood. He wore success like a second skin. Too polished, too perfect. "Marcus," I said. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "To what do I owe the honor?" "Tom Avery. He died last night." For the first time, Marcus's expression flickered. Quick, almost imperceptible, but real. "I heard," he said. "Terrible accident." It wasn't an accident.
His jaw tightened. Good. A crack. I stepped closer. 3 days ago, one of your people contacted several of my suppliers. They used information you shouldn't have. And yesterday, someone sent a message to the wrong phone, one meant for Evan. Marcus's calm slipped, another fraction of an inch. "Jake," he said quietly, "I don't know what you think But I cut him off. "I think you've been talking to my son. I think you've been making plans with him. And I think whatever the two of you are building, you decided Tom was a threat." A long silence, long enough that I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then Marcus exhaled slowly, folding his arms. "Jake, you're a smart man, so I'm going to give you a chance to walk out of here." "Walk out of here?" "Yes." His voice softened in a way that somehow made it colder. "Before you involve yourself in something you don't understand." I felt the floor tilt under me. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't even pretending. He was warning me. "You've known Evan since he was a kid. You think I won't fight to protect him?" Another flicker of movement, a tightening around his eyes. "Protect him?" Marcus repeated. "Jake, you're not listening. Evan doesn't need protection from me." I stared at him, waiting. "He needs protection," Marcus said, "from himself." The room went silent. Every instinct in me screamed, every warning sign flashed, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "What does that mean?" Marcus took a step closer, lowering his voice until it was barely a whisper. "It means you're too late." I felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest. "Whatever you think Evan told me, whatever you think he's doing, you're only seeing a piece of it. And if you push him now, if you corner him, you won't just lose your company." His eyes locked onto mine. "You'll lose him." I opened my mouth to speak, but Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and immediately his expression changed. Hard, alert, calculating. He looked back at me. "You should go home, Jake." "Why?" His answer chilled me to the bone. "Because Evan's already on his way there." I broke every speed limit between Marcus's office and my house. The whole drive, my mind replayed his final words. "Evan's already on his way there." Like a warning siren I couldn't shut off. By the time I pulled into my driveway, dusk had swallowed the last of the light. The house looked normal from the outside. Peaceful. Still. Too still. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me with a weight that felt deliberate, like the house itself knew what was coming. Evan stood in the living room. Not pacing, not anxious, just waiting. He held something in his hands. Not a weapon, but somehow worse. A folder. Thick, overstuffed, the kind of folder that only comes from digging through years of someone else's life. He turned to face me slowly, his expression unreadable, calm, composed, almost rehearsed. "Dad," he said. That tone. Quiet. Even. A tone people use when they've already made up their mind.
I swallowed hard. What are you doing here? Evan lifted the folder slightly. This is everything Marcus asked me to collect. Every contract, every vendor agreement, every bid system you've used since 2005. My pulse thudded painfully against my ribs. Evan, why? He didn't hesitate. Because Ironwood is dying, and you're too stubborn to see it. Ironwood. Dying.
My throat tightened. We're thriving, I said. We had our best fiscal year since the pandemic. On paper, he said. But you're blind to what's coming. Material shortages, interest rate hikes, supply chain volatility. You're still running this company like it's 1999. You won't modernize. You won't delegate. You won't innovate. His eyes narrowed, sharp as cut stone. So, I'm doing it for you. It hit me like a punch. He wasn't stealing the company for greed. He was rationalizing it, convincing himself it was necessary. That betrayal was logic, not malice. I forced a calm I didn't feel. Partnering with Marcus won't save the business. He almost laughed. Partnering? Dad, you think this is a partnership? He placed the folder on the coffee table. This is a takeover. The word landed like a hammer. Before I could respond, he opened the folder and spread its contents. A mosaic of contracts, financial reports, supplier lists, old account numbers, signatures I'd penned decades ago, evidence of every crack beneath the foundation. Marcus has backing, Evan said. Real backing. Investors who want this region consolidated under one company. They want someone younger, someone adoptable. I stared at my son. Evan, you're talking about a hostile acquisition. I'm talking about survival. Something shifted in his eyes then. Something colder, deeper. A shadow I'd prayed I'd never see on my child's face. And Tom, I said quietly. What happened to Tom wasn't survival. That was... He cut me off with a raised hand. Tom made things complicated. My blood froze. Did you... No, Evan said. I didn't touch him. He paused. But I didn't stop it either. The room seemed to contract around me. You were supposed to stay out of this, he continued. You weren't supposed to dig. You weren't supposed to ask questions. You were supposed to let the transition happen cleanly. Transition. He said it like he was describing a new management system, not a betrayal that had already cost someone their life. Evan, I whispered, you're in way over your head. Whoever you're working with, Marcus or someone behind him, they're using you. No, he said quietly. They're trusting me, more than you ever did. The words hit harder than I expected. He knew it. He let the silence burn. Then he reached into his jacket, and for a split second, my heart stopped. But he wasn't pulling a weapon. He pulled out a key. Long, black, familiar. The key to my office archives. I need the rest of the documents tonight. My voice barely worked. And if I say no? He stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint tremor in his hands. Not fear, not guilt. Adrenaline. Then you force me to make decisions I don't want to make, and neither of us walks away the same. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. My son,
my only child, stood before me, declaring a line he was willing to cross. And in that moment, staring at the key in his hand, I realized something with cold, brutal clarity. This wasn't him being manipulated. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a mistake. This was Evan exactly as he meant to be. Intentional, calculated, committed. Whatever was buried in my backyard months later, whatever secret he tried to hide under that cold earth, it began here, with this moment, with this choice, with a son staring his father in the eye and saying, "Give me the company or step aside."
For a long moment, neither of us moved. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, an ordinary sound that felt painfully out of place between the two of us, standing there like adversaries, weighing which beam would splinter first. Evan still held the archive key between two fingers, the metal catching a glint of fading daylight. His hand was steady. Mine wasn't. "Evan," I said quietly, "you don't understand the people you're dealing with." He didn't blink. "I understand them better than you ever could." "No," I said, stepping forward. "You think you do, but men like Marcus Vale, men with investors behind them, they don't share power. They don't give control. They take, and they take everything, including the people who help them." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not amusement, pity. "Dad, you're still imagining I'm the kid who needed you to show me how to use a nail gun." He shook his head. "I'm not that kid anymore." "You're right. You're not. But you're also not the man you're pretending to be." His eyes sharpened, quick, defensive, a flash of hurt so brief I might have imagined it. "You think you know better than me?" he asked softly. "I know you, better than anyone, and I know when you're lying to yourself." He laughed once, short, hollow. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Talk like you've always been there." He stepped closer, words tightening like a vice. "You were a great builder, a great owner, but not a great father." The words landed hard, not because they were unfair, but because they were true. "You were married to Ironwood. Everything else came second, including me, including Mom." My chest tightened like something inside it cracked but didn't break. "So don't act shocked now that I learned from you. I learned how to prioritize, how to be ruthless when it meant protecting something bigger." I exhaled slowly. "Evan, I was trying to build a future for you. And now I'm trying to build one for myself." He lifted the key again. "This is the last piece. Once I have the rest of the documents, the transition goes clean. No legal battles, no drawn-out disputes, no messy public fallout." "And if I refuse?" His jaw flexed. "Then we do it the hard way, and I don't want that." I stepped forward until we were close enough to feel the tension radiating off each other like heat from a furnace. "What exactly would the hard way be?" I asked quietly. His eyes didn't waver. "I'd filed to remove you as CEO on grounds of incompetence. I'd submit the performance reports Marcus helped me draft. I'd pull the financial forecasts showing decline. I'd rally key suppliers to withdraw support. And by the time you tried to fight back, the board would have already sided with me." My throat went dry. He had planned this, in detail, down to the sequence of moves, down to the timing. "Evan," I said, barely above a whisper, "you're talking about dismantling everything I've built." "No," he said, "I'm talking about saving it from the man who's dragging it down." The blow landed deeper than any insult, but I kept my voice steady. "And Marcus? What does he get out of this?" "Room," Evan said. "Room to expand, room to strengthen distribution channels, room to consolidate." "Consolidate," I repeated, meaning absorb. His silence was confirmation enough. "So, he takes over Ironwood." "He takes over a portion of Ironwood," he corrected. "We divide the region. We share resources. We—" "Don't fool yourself," I cut in. "He doesn't want to share anything. He's using you. You're a foot in the door, a means to an end. And once the takeover is clean—" Evan's expression hardened. "Stop. You'll be obsolete." "Stop. A tremor slipped into his voice. Dad, stop. He wasn't fully certain. Not yet. There was still a fracture, small but real. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. Let me help you out of this, before it's too late. For a split second, just one, his eyes shifted, flickered, a crack of doubt, a child's instinct to trust his father. Then something behind that expression steeled, shut, locked. He stepped back and lifted the key between us like a barrier. It is too late. The words felt final. He pocketed the key. We're doing this my way, with or without your cooperation. But if you fight me, you'll regret it. His voice didn't shake. Mine did. Evan, he turned, walked toward the door, paused with his hand on the knob, and without looking back, he said, You taught me to build strong foundations, but you never checked your own. That's your mistake, not mine. The door shut behind him, softly, quietly, but the sound echoed through the house like the collapse of a load-bearing wall. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that archive key glinting in Evan's fingers, heard the soft finality of the door clicking shut behind him. My own house felt foreign that night, like someone had rearranged the walls just enough that nothing fit anymore. By morning, a single truth settled in my bones. If I waited, I would lose everything. If I acted, I might lose my son. But doing nothing was no longer an option. The first crack in his plan. At 7:12 a.m., I was in my office. At 7:14, I unlocked the fireproof cabinet only I had keys to. And at 7:17, I discovered the first real mistake Evan had made. Some of the comps, the comparative bid documents I kept for reference on major contracts, were missing. Not all of them, but enough to notice, enough to see the pattern. He wasn't gutting ironwood, he was extracting its skeleton. The valuable parts, the foundation he needed to present ironwood to Marcus's investors as a clean, streamlined acquisition. He was already building the blueprint of his takeover, and now I knew where he would strike next. The man who should have never knocked. By 9 a.m., I was sitting across from someone I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, Lance Rourke, a lawyer with a reputation for being as sharp as a nail gun and twice as loud. He'd left Ironwood on bad terms. My fault, honestly. He warned me the board wanted succession planning. I brushed him off. He warned me Evan was becoming a focal point for external interest. I treated it like paranoia. Now I sat across from him like a man who finally realized the fire wasn't smoke alarm testing.
You look like hell, Jake, Lance said. Good, I replied, because hell's exactly what I'm in. He leaned back, studying me with the kind of wolfish patience only attorneys and predators possess. So, he said, tell me what your son did. I told him everything. The archive key, the documents missing, the alliance with Marcus Vale, the planned board removal, the hostile acquisition, and Tom. When I finished, Lance let out a long, low whistle. Well, he said, you've got yourself a real mess. Can you help me? I asked. Help you, Jake? This is a corporate war dressed up like a family intervention, and you just showed up unarmed. Then arm me. He smirked. That I can do. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. What's that? I asked. A counter move, Lance said. One that hits before Evan even realizes you're playing. He slid the papers toward me. A temporary injunction request, authority freeze orders, protective filings that would lock Ironwood's assets from any transfer, sale, or reallocation, and most importantly, a cease control petition. The exact weapon Evan planned to use against me, but now I was going to use it first. It wouldn't stop him forever, but it would slow him, force him to reveal his next step, force him to make a mistake.
This will blindside him, Lance said. And Marcus. They'll panic. They'll scramble. That panic will make them sloppy. I nodded slowly. Sloppy meant visible. Visible meant vulnerable. But Jake, Lance added, his tone shifting, once you file this, there's no taking it back. Evan will know you're fighting. Whatever line existed between you two, he tapped the papers, this erases it. I knew that. I felt it. But I also felt something darker, something forming in the space where fear had been. Resolve. File it, I said. Lance didn't hesitate. It's done, he replied. The message waiting at my door. When I got home that evening, the sun was low, throwing jagged shadows across the porch. My front door looked normal at first glance, until I noticed the envelope taped to the wood. White, unmarked, no name, no sender. I pulled it off, opened it, and unfolded the single sheet inside. Just 6 words. Dad, you shouldn't have done that. My skin chilled. But what froze me solid was the second page.
A printed photo, taken from outside, through my living room window, from sometime today. And in the photo, Lance Rourke, sitting at my kitchen table, reviewing the injunction documents. A perfect shot, at the perfect angle, by someone who wanted me to know they were there, watching, close. Then I noticed one more thing. The photo was timestamped. 12 minutes after I left the house this morning. Meaning, someone had been at my home while I was with Lance. Meaning, they knew my countermove already. Meaning, they had eyes on me, constantly. And then? At the bottom of the photo, 3 letters written in Evan's handwriting. Not angry, not emotional. Cold. Deliberate. E. M. V. His initials, but arranged like a signature, like a brand, like a warning, or a promise. The air felt heavier that night. Not just the house, the world around it. As if everything had stopped to witness the collapse finally reach the bottom floor. The photo, the timestamp, Evan's initials scrawled at the bottom. It wasn't a threat, it was a message. He wanted me to know he was ahead. He wanted me to see how close he was. He wanted me afraid, but fear turned to something colder. Resolve. I waited for darkness to swallow the house before I made my move. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot Evan and I used to share breakfast when he was 5 years old. Back then, his legs barely reached the chair's edge. Now he stood on the other side of a corporate battlefield, trying to bury the man who built the ground he walked on. At 11:43 p.m., the doorknob clicked. He didn't sneak, he didn't hide, he walked in openly, like this was his house now. He stepped into the kitchen, hands in his jacket pockets, expression calm, eyes cold. "You filed the injunction," he said. No greeting, no hesitation. "Yes." You shouldn't have. I slid the photo across the table, the one taken from outside my window. Evan didn't even flinch. "You're being watched," he said, "for your own safety." "My safety?" I repeated. "That's what you call surveillance now?" "It's not surveillance." He stepped closer. "It's containment." His voice was too calm, too steady. "Evan," I said, "you don't have to do this. You can walk away. Marcus can't protect you from the fallout of... He cut me off. You really think Marcus is the one you should fear? There was something in his tone, something I hadn't heard before. He's not the one who planned this, Evan said quietly. He's a bridge, a tool, a means to structure the acquisition. Then who are you protecting? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said a name I hadn't expected. Mom. The room stopped, completely. He exhaled slowly, like a man carrying something for years. She's the investor, he said. She's the one backing Marcus. She's the one consolidating the region. She's the one who said Ironwood wouldn't survive another 3 years without restructuring. My stomach dropped.
Your mother hasn't been part of the company in 15 years, Evan said, and she's been watching every mistake you made in that time. Every wrong expansion, every outdated contract, every risk you refused to take. My hands shook. She left Ironwood. No, she left you, not the company. The house felt ice cold. So this entire takeover, I whispered, was her idea? A partnership, Evan corrected, with me. She trusts me. She sees what you don't. Ironwood can't survive if it stays in your hands. You're holding on to the past. We're building the future. He reached into his jacket. This time, he pulled out not a key, but a document. He placed it on the table. Sign this, he said. Step down voluntarily. Keep your shares, keep your legacy, we'll take care of the rest. And if I refuse? I asked. His jaw tensed. Dad, I don't want to bury you under what comes next. I looked at my son, the boy I raised, the man he'd become, the stranger he now was. Evan, I said, you're choosing the wrong side. No, he replied, I'm choosing the winning one. The room held its breath. I picked up the pen. His eyes flickered, not fear, not anger, something harder. But instead of signing, I crossed a single line through my printed name. A refusal, a denial, a declaration. Evan's face changed. Something in him snapped. Something final. You just destroyed everything, he whispered. No, I said, you did. When you forgot who built you. We stared at each other across the table, father and son divided by ink, ambition, and 15 years of buried resentment. Then, Evan stepped back.
He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply said, then we're done. He turned toward the door, but before he left, he added one final sentence, soft, steady, and devastating. You won't stop what's coming. The door closed. This time, it didn't echo. It settled, like the last stone placed on a grave. Epilogue. The ground beneath the earth. 3 months later, the police dug up my backyard. A body. A man tied to the takeover. A man who crossed Evan. A man Evan dealt with himself. The son I tried to save became the reason every secret finally surfaced. Ironwood fell. Marcus vanished. And Evan? Evan disappeared into the same quiet shadow he once stepped out of. Some stories end with redemption. Some end with justice. Mine ended with truth.